We made it.
Good riddance.
Happy.
All right.
None of us are in time zones that are already in the new year or close.
Still pretty exciting.
Yep.
Okay, so today is Thursday, December 31st. Woohoo! This is our weekly design and
Good riddance.
usability meeting.
It's not me.
And
Somebody has the YouTube video open.
I did. I closed it.
Okay.
We should start with introductions. I'm Jen Lampton. I'm running from Oakland, California. I'm really excited about all of the usability improvements we've made to Backdrop. I have a site launching today, and the people who are using it are really thrilled with how easy it is to use, which is great. So yeah, I'm interested to keep moving in that direction and see what needs to get done in today's meeting. Let's turn it over to Luke.
All right. I'm not muted. I'm Luke McCormick. I'm a web product manager, project manager, etc. in San Ramon, California. And I've got my own things going, but I'm actually kind of curious to see what other design issues are relevant to the upcoming release of Backdrop. Phil.
Hey, Phil Ward out of Wichita, Kansas. I don't have anything specific, just kind of being a fly on the wall and kind of see where conversation goes. Tim, I don't think you've gone yet.
Nope, I'm the last one. I'm Tim Erickson, St. Paul Tim, coming from Deerwood, Minnesota. Where quick deer report, nothing outside my window right now, sorry. So there were 2 deer about an hour ago outside the window. Yeah, and I have been sort of frantically busy with other work the last month or so, and so I'm dabbling in the issue queue and Backdrop stuff every day, but just not having time to sink my teeth in, which is a good and a bad thing. So I'm here to just help out in any way I can. That's all. So how do we want to proceed?
Well, we have a handful of issues on weekly agenda. We have theme initiative update section. I don't know if there's anything new there. One thing I did want to say I'm very excited about is the better help text for the layout path field as RTBC. So that's something that has confused a lot of people for a long time. So I'm really excited to see that change get in. On the usability front, I think it'll be great. I also just peeked at the 118 milestone. So our feature freeze is actually not tomorrow. It's going to go until Sunday. But if you look at the 118 milestone, there's a whole bunch of user experience issues in there that are currently marked RTBC, which is great. So things like Tim's issue for changing the name full HTML to raw HTML. There's an issue about the exposed file name filters. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that, even though it's tagged as a new feature, is actually going to be a huge usability improvement too. So just wanted to throw that in there.
So there's a couple of things, I mean, that aren't urgent that I could bring up, right? That I think could benefit from a little bit of quick talk.
Sure.
Actually, 2 of them that are related. One, I think it would be helpful to clarify this changing front page to homepage in Core. I think we have a PR that it might have even been RTBC, but then some people raised concerns about this translation, and then it got set back to needs discussion. And I'm just wondering if other people have a better understanding of if that was the intention. So I don't know if this was ever actually RTBC, but it did get, the issue kind of there's a PR, it got set back. And I'm not quite sure if the people that are concerned about this are like saying it shouldn't happen, or they just wanted to raise some concerns that needed to be addressed. Because that one that looked like it was almost ready to go in, but now I don't understand where the issue's at, right? Yeah. And Jen, you commented on it because I asked the question about, like, is this have we already dealt with translation issue? Because the issues that there's basically a PR, isn't it? Your PR, Jen,
I think so.
that goes through and changes. And
Yeah, so the history of this issue is that when we went to put in
Right.
Backdrop's layout for the homepage, there was debate about whether we should call this a homepage or a front page. And it turns out that the only place you ever refer to the homepage as a front page is in Drupal. And so we decided to call it the homepage because that was intuitive to anyone with a website. But in doing so, we introduced an inconsistency where the new thing is called a homepage, and there are a whole bunch of places through the rest of Backdrop where you refer to the homepage as the front page. And so this sort of brought those two things in line. The issue with translation is not something that's unique to this issue. We've been running into it ever since we started making usability changes in Backdrop. In the very beginning, we decided that we weren't going to block a usability improvement because it required string translation. So this is something that in Drupal, once Drupal 7 is released, they're not going to change any strings in core until Drupal 8 is released because it would require retranslating. And so that means that the user interface can't get updated very easily because there's a lot of changes that would just be text changes that don't get in. And so we dropped that pattern in Backdrop and said, there's an interface that we can improve. We're going to improve it, even if we can only improve it in English. And that does make it much harder for people who are keeping up with translations to keep all the translations for the whole user interface available. But it does mean that the interface in general can get better faster. And so this particular issue is that when we introduced the word homepage, we didn't break any existing translations because we didn't change any of the existing interfaces. And now that we're doing that, it is going to be breaking translations. I don't think it'll stop the issue because it hasn't stopped. Translation issues haven't stopped anything before, but it is important to note, especially for people who are using the interface in different languages, that when you go to the site settings page, the section there that lets you define your front page is now going to say homepage, and it may not be in the language you selected it for it. So I think it was sort of an asterisk there that, like, for those of us who are using translations, this could be a problem. And for those of us who are creating translations, we need to come back and translate these strings. And so we now have this core label for translation. So when an issue needs to be translated, it gets that label on it. And that should make it so that people who are doing translations can search for all of the issues that got in 1.8, find all the new translations, make all the new translations, and then make another release or 118 of the translation for 118 on the translation site. So we have sort of a process for doing that, although it is pretty slow.
Right. And the reason I brought up this issue is because this was actually marked RTBC back in August. And then it looks like Nate added the label needs more feedback, but left it RTBC back in September. And it was just in that mode for a while. Well, I guess a little while after that, then Peter removed the RT, some people raised. So when Nate said it needs more discussion, some people raised the issue about translations, and then Peter removed the RTBC thing. But I'm just confused about what the next step is on this issue, because now it's like a bunch of people are saying, yeah, it's kind of a problem for translators, but nobody said we shouldn't do it, I don't think.
So Peter added RTBC and removed it.
Yeah, he was the one who removed it or added it in August, and then he removed it after Nate on September. In August, Peter added it, and then in September 9th, Nate added the needs more feedback, which I would assume that if you're adding needs more feedback, you should remove RTBC at the same time. Or not. Can you have an RTBC issue that needs more feedback?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely like the code status is RTBC, and then the question is just like, should we or not? So I could see that needing both. But yeah, I think for my preference would be to change this issue back to RTBC and say, we've discussed it, we've decided that changing it to homepage is an improvement, it'll go in, but it does now have this label that it didn't have before, that'll indicate to people doing translations that it need to be translated. So I think that's all that was necessary. I think Nate's reason for marking it as needs more feedback is he wasn't sure that change was one we wanted. It wasn't related to translation.
Well, Indigo Zayla, it looks like actually does come out in opposition. She said, actually, homepage seems worse to me than front page. So there is at least one person that specifically, after Nate asked for feedback, said, I don't like this change. But then Herb Duell pointed out, well, haven't we already made this decision to make this change?
Yeah.
And that's sort of what's confusing me, is I'm agreeing. So I'm not sure if some people think we want to go back on this. I mean, it's weird because it's kind of like we made this decision to do it, and now a few people are questioning that. And so what do we do?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're never going to get 100% consensus on everything.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So I think it would just be, how adamantly does Indigo Zayla feel against it, and people who agree, is it enough to say we'll change the homepage layout to a front page layout? Because that would be the other way to go with it.
Right. Well, so I specifically said, if you're objecting to this, are you suggesting that we go back or what? And nobody's replied to that. So
yeah. So I think the next steps would be to market RTBC again and say, it sounds like most of us want to move forward in the direction that we had a long time ago. And, there's nothing that says we can't change our mind later if we try it later. And it'll be much easier to change all strings rather than have like half one and half the other. So,
right.
Yeah, maybe slightly easier, maybe not.
Anyway, so I raised this issue just because it looks like it's one of these issues that's caught right now. It's sort of in limbo. It's not an urgent issue in my opinion, but it's caught in a limbo, which could leave it sort of half done forever.
I've got to run. My dog apparently needs
Sure.
a walk, but I'll be right back.
Go ahead.
That gives me the break. I was looking forward to interject something which may or may not be off topic, which is
Sure.
why it's a good time to go here. I'm just kind of curious, and Phil has mentioned things along this line too, about kind of the overall issue of how do we track changes from Drupal? Right? It strikes me that there are a couple of pools of usability issues, right? Like there's the way the net does it. There's a way the Drupal community decided to handle it, which
Right.
differs in some sort of dramatic ways with the way the internet went. And then there's ours, which is kind of like an amalgam of those two. A bunch of things, most things really, we've stuck with how Drupal does it. A few things we've kind of rolled back to the way the internet does it. And I think there's some things where we've just come up with our new things, right? Like a third brand new improvement things. And all seem, perfectly valid approaches. But it seems like it'd be useful to have that documented somewhere. And it might be documented, I just don't know where it is. So that's actually one of the questions that I'll throw out there. Is that documented somewhere? And I just don't know where to look for it.
I don't know. My snarky answer when you raised this question was going to be Gregory is how we track these things.
Right. Yeah.
Is that Gregory has it all in his head and he just tells us what Drupal's doing, what we're doing.
I mean, there's even like another level to it. And sorry, Phil, I'll throw it back to you as soon as I get this one last thought out. Is that there's more than one Drupal realities, right? Because there are things that got changed sort of late in the day of Drupal 7.
Mm-hmm.
For example, the reorganization of the modules page, where I definitely liked it the old way better. I don't like the included modules to be split into like 5 different groups. But it's one of those things I figure that's a battle for another day. I'm just kind of curious how those go. So sorry, Phil.
I can get unmuted here. Yeah, no worries. I was kind of thinking about it. Maybe I'm out of line in saying this. So maybe this is just an opinion of that I have. I don't know if others feel this way or not, but just kind of thinking about it over the last few days. I think that people who come to Backdrop from Drupal would love to see Backdrop become the Drupal that they always wanted. And what I mean by that is that there's a lot of things that I think folks kind of wanted out of Drupal that it just never got accomplished. You know, easier usability, some better GUI changes, UI changes, UX changes, etc. And it's like Drupal was just so stuck in the Drupal 4, Drupal 5, Drupal 6 days that a lot of this stuff just never got addressed and got fixed moving forward into newer versions of Drupal. And so I kind of feel like that's turned a lot of people off who would like to use Drupal, but they just, it's like, when are you guys going to move forward? You keep doing things the old way. The web, the internet has moved forward. Like you said, the internet has created kind of their own unofficial standard way of doing things, and Drupal lags behind that. So, you know, I would love to see Backdrop kind of take the approach of, we're not going to follow the web, we're going to help create the web. And I think over time, as the user base grows, I think that can be something that can happen. But it frustrated me to no end that Drupal always lagged behind the overall web in the way things happen. You know, it was just a very cautious, low risk approach to building the overall experience. And personally, I think that's why a lot of folks kind of gravitated towards other platforms. You know, platforms that were following the standards and were using newer languages, just whatever. I think you get the point. So anyway, it's kind of a little long short of it.
Oh yeah, no, I totally disagree. How much of that did you hear, Jen? Do you have audio on while you're wandering around, or?
No, what did I miss? Summary.
You get to watch the recording.
I can watch the recording, that's fine.
Is this just an interesting discussion, or does this have like a to-do attached to it?
Well, it has in my mind. Well, first of all, you know, I was checking to see if it wasn't already done, and I just didn't know about it, because that happens sometimes. But I think I'll do the quick recap for Jen. I was discussing backwards UI compatibility, basically, where people using Backdrop, there's lots of the way Backdrop does things that are inherited from Drupal. There are a certain amount of things that were changed from Drupal from the way Drupal did it more towards the way the internet does it, which, you know, the current example of homepage, front page is an example of. And there's some things that they're like new. They're like, hey, no one's done this yet, but this is better, so we're going to do this way. And they're all valuable and important things. My concern is basically documentation. I'd like to be able to leave behind ultimately Drupal's decisions on things, but in order to do that, in order to make it comfortable to get there, that has to be well documented. It has to be like, okay, Drupal people, here's what we've changed. Here's a list. Here's some things you need to know. Good. You know, people coming over from other places, people coming over from WordPress, people coming over from, you know, new. You're young. First website you're building. You know, here's how you do it. So it seems like there's language differences that are only going to get bigger. And I don't know to what extent we track them, but it feels like something we should track, because I think we might want to. I think there's something to be said for making more dramatic changes, but without this, you can't really make those dramatic changes because you'll lose too much of the existing momentum. So I didn't have any like specific plan. Those are just like thoughts that are bouncing around in my
as far as documentation goes, that's interesting, because our intent is every time we make a change like this is to make it so that you wouldn't need any documentation. Like, we want the interface itself to be self-explanatory, so you don't have to Google like what is a front page in order to figure out how that works. But if you're coming from Drupal 7 and you're like, where do I set my front page? You're going to look for the string front page because that's already in your brain, not realizing that like in Backdrop, we call it a home page. You know, in this case, it's not as important because it's on the same page in the same place it was in Drupal 7. So you'll stumble across it accidentally. But there are things like that where you know, we're trying to make it intuitive to new people, but it does break the knowledge of existing people. And a couple of these places where we've wanted to make really big changes but been afraid to is the views interface and the field UI, because everybody coming from Drupal knows how to use those. And even though
Yeah.
they aren't great, it's a lot of existing knowledge is at stake there. But this is
Yeah.
a much smaller, simpler, it's probably not as important. But yeah, that's interesting.
So I mean, it feels like there could be. I mean, maybe this is one of those like 2.0 things, right? One of the changes where you know, as a Backdrop 2.0, it no longer looks like Drupal, and you know, to get there, it has to not be as dependent on people wanting old Drupal for that. And but in any case, there would need to be a path for that. Like, okay, if you're looking for this, here's where to find it.
Yeah.
And maybe it's, yeah, go Phil.
I was going to say with that mindset, that's kind of why I'm advocating this the bus module, getting it out there in front of people on Drupal, Drupal 7, and trying to do what we can to bring those users into Backdrop. And then if we can get a good majority of those Drupal 7 users on Backdrop, when 2.0 comes, they're already familiar with Backdrop, and then we can start making changes, big changes, because then they're already familiar with how Backdrop works, and it's not as drastic of change for these guys because they're already on Backdrop. I agree with you that if a 2.0 comes out and we're still waiting for a whole bunch of Drupal 7 people to come over, it's going to be like apples and oranges. What is going on here? You know, it's like I have to completely relearn all this stuff. And that's kind of why I've been pushing pretty heavy for that bus telemetry. I know that that's part of outreach, but it goes into this discussion that, hey, if we can get these people in, get them under this umbrella, then we can start making these changes. We don't have to worry as much about the overall user base just completely flipping out and not understanding this new system and not wanting to gravitate towards Backdrop. So it's kind of a big picture is what I'm looking at with that whole thing.
Well, I think it's important, but I don't think you're ever going to have to not worry about it, because you're never going to be able to get like everybody to switch, and whoever doesn't switch at that time is going to be a lot of people. So you can't ever abandon them. There has to be a path even after any particular change to
Plus,
catch
like
up.
by the time Backdrop 2 comes out, we're going to have a whole bunch of people who've learned Backdrop 1, and so now they
Right.
have the same knowledge as if they'd come from Drupal because we didn't change it. So I think like we're always going to have this problem regardless of whether it's to a different system or the current system or what have you.
Right. And I think some of these, though, it's incremental changes. You know, you got to kind of take a look at the way Apple has done the stuff that they do. From a UI standpoint, their interface has not changed in like 20 years, 15, 20 years. You know, they make very small incremental changes through each OS update. It's their back end that they do a lot of major stuff on. But they give their engineers, the third party people, they give them plenty of time to make the necessary changes on the back end. You know, for example, this whole ARM thing and Apple going to ARM, a lot of people are up in arms about that, pun intended, that, oh, they're moving over to ARM. Now we have to get rid of our x86 architecture software. And it's kind of like, guys, this has been in the code for the last 5 years. So that's on you if you have not upgraded your software to work on this, because we've had it available for a really long time. Now we're just saying it's done. So I think sometimes that's what you got to do to get people to move forward. And that's a little bit off topic, but anyway.
I'm looking for the action items here, and I don't understand. This seems like a philosophical discussion that's interesting, but
right, yeah, sorry.
I'm not sure what I'm supposed to do with it today.
Yeah, it's
actually
right.
At RTBC.
Yeah, to me, it's discussions that it's kind of like, we come up with discussions so we can think about it.
Well, we've got 4 days. We've got 4 days till a release. We're on deadlines.
Right.
And I don't know where anything we're talking about right now has anything to do with the things we're trying to get in now.
Good point.
That's what I tried to do while Jen was out of the room, and I was just filling up empty cycles. What do we have to accomplish here?
anyways, so I love the philosophical discussions. I'm just a little bit impatient today because
It's all good. Yeah, let's
trying to
get back
think
on
about
topic.
some of the issues that we're focused on.
Should we go back to the agenda?
We weren't really
Well-
working up the agenda.
No, but I think we started to do was just look at issues, how to move some issues forward, and they weren't necessarily super pressing issues. This homepage one, there's that help text one, Jen, that you were excited about. There's another one that I've proposed that I haven't really gotten any feedback on, pro or con, which is this one about it's related to this homepage issue. Is Phil just experienced this, and has proposed some bigger solutions. But again, I'm thinking about one of the things we can do sometimes, and there's pros and cons to this, right? Is fix a big issue, is when we run into a usability issue, sometimes we can make it better by just adjusting the help text, right? Before we are able to actually fix the UI. And there's always a risk when you do that then you don't fix the UI because you feel like you addressed it with the help text. Phil experienced it. I've heard it from one or two other users that they get very confused about the fact that if you change that homepage path, the homepage layout no longer works. And to me, that is it's like, I understand that now, but it's like, I don't understand how a newcomer is supposed to understand the fact that if you change the path for the homepage, that means the homepage layout will no longer work. And I just like to get I think we could put at least a little clue in the help
Why
text.
do you think that is changing the path for the homepage? Like the path for the homepage is / Like there's no.
What I'm saying, the default homepage setting, if somebody changes that to a node, so they want node 22 to be their homepage. Phil and at least one other person have said they spent a lot of time putting blocks on the homepage layout that aren't showing up on their homepage because their homepage is node 22, which is using the node layout.
Okay. So let me cover this again. So we have two types of layouts. We have a layout that wraps existing content, and we have a layout that is a standalone page. And I think what you're getting at here is people think that the homepage layout will wrap whatever they put on their homepage, but in reality,
I think so.
a standalone page.
I think so. And to me, that makes sense. Like again, I wouldn't have this problem anymore because I know how things work. But if you go to the layout page and you see there's a layout for the home page, you expect that to work on the home page, regardless of what it is, which is not how it is designed to work at all. And
I experienced that recently.
And I
didn't know that
like,
was going to work.
And I feel like just putting a little bit of help text could at least help people understand that, because right now I think it's really hard to figure that out. And we've heard from a couple of people that they wasted a lot of time before they finally figured that out.
Interesting.
And my help text suggestion has kind of gone ignored while people try to address some other issues like the default, like is the default node or user. And
let me interject on some ideas that I'm kind of coming up with off the top of my head, which one idea I think I addressed in one of the issue queues, but I think on the system config page where you change the physical homepage path, I think if we just add some little text there that says, something like, if you plan on changing this to something other than home, why don't you check out the home layout first? And then have a link to that home layout. So that way people know, oh, well, this home path is going to this layout. What layout? What are they talking about? And then that'll kind of direct them there. Now, from the standpoint of what I did in my situation, I created a node and I set the path of that node to home. So that content, that node now overrode the layout path of home. And so that content type or that node was actually using, I think it was the default, the overall layout, if I remember right. It basically overrode the home layout path.
And it didn't give you an error when you tried it.
No, I didn't get any errors or nothing. And
that
so
is the problem.
Well, I think as opposed to an error, I think maybe just kind of a help warning that if you set home in a content path and there is a layout path with the exact same path, just a little warning that says, hey, there's a layout with this that's already using this path. Are you sure that you want this path on
It
there?
shouldn't let you do that because you're actually breaking the system. Like you're creating 2 menu entries where there should only be one. That shouldn't be allowed. And the fact that we don't check that, I think, is a problem. Like we check when you try and save a node with the same node as another node, like we don't let you override it. So I don't think there's any reason it should be different. But that sounds like a bug.
Okay.
But I think that's the only part of I agree. We're facing like 4 problems here.
Right.
One of them is this like 2 kinds of layouts thing. One of them is the user interface for setting the homepage, not telling you what you're linking it to. And now we have another one of the path, not telling you when you set the path that there's a problem. So there's like 3 problems we've got going on here.
Right.
But yeah.
And I think some of these, like Tim said, I think some of these can be addressed short term with some help text to kind of point people in the right direction for now until we can kind of come in and address these in a more formal fashion. That going back like what you said, Jen, I love your approach that the UI, the interface, it needs to be such that you don't have to go to a tutorial to figure it out. The way I look at it, you've got people like Sheldon Cooper and Big Bang Theory that create the stuff, and they make it for other people like Sheldon Cooper. And it's like, you got to look at it from an engineering standpoint and go, how can I make this so Penny could use it? And so sometimes I think that's what gets a little bit lost in some of these things is, you get an engineer that writes things so that other engineers can understand it. But then people like, Penny, she has no. Anyway, yeah, what are your thoughts on some short-term wins on that? Just kind of point people in the right direction, and then for maybe next couple of releases, we can address some of the more bigger aspects of all this.
I think better help text on the homepage setting that explains what it is, so people don't think it's setting a path. It's like pointing to something that's existing. I think would be clear, and then fixing the bug that prevents you from overriding one thing with another thing. I wonder if you did it the other way around. If you created a node first and then you created a layout, if the layout would win.
Yeah, oh yeah, sorry, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. And then yeah, longer term, trying to figure out how to either clarify the 2 different types of layouts or let people choose. Like maybe they want, like giving them a user interface that's like, wrap my node X with this layout. Like if you've already spent time working on the layout, that might be a good option too.
Well, I think actually this ties into what I was saying before about the things that we've done the same as Drupal, same as the internet and our own things. The layout manager is I think probably the single biggest, differentest thing that is homegrown.
Yeah.
So we really need to explain the fuck out of it. we need to have like, so look, if you're coming from anywhere else, you haven't seen this. Go ahead and try to figure it out. That's cool. We try to make it intuitive. But if not, here's the doc. Here's like the 3-page thing that explains it in detail. So that, because otherwise, a word here or there is not going to get you.
Yes, Mohammadul here, and nice to meet you, and Happy New Year.
Hello.
And I want to say about page layout. It's very complicated in Drupal, so it's need to figure out and how it's possible to easy to understand and need a proper documents. And Drupal has a limited documents still, I think, and even Backdrop has a limited documents about that. So we need to proper documents everything so user can understand or developer can understand and how to use it.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Yep.
One more quick thought on that: the groups, the layout groups. What are the thoughts on adding a / to the beginning of the path? I think that was a big disconnect for me. I completely overlooked the path was the header of the group because when I saw home, it's just like, oh, that's the header for home. Sure, yeah, it's home. It says default home right here or whatever. I didn't even realize until Tim and I started talking, oh, no, that's the path that layout is handling. And so I think having a / in front will be a better indicator that no, this is a path. This is not a header. This is a path for this group of layouts. Is there a reason for not having a / that I'm not seeing?
No, okay, interesting.
We could even go one further and put the URL for the site you're on, so that it would be not just the path, but the whole URL.
Ooh.
Well, so when Phil immediately suggested that we divide sort of single page and multi-page layouts out, and I went and I looked at this page, the first thing occurred to me is that it isn't obvious, like if a page is just doing one path. I mean, it is there, but I think it isn't obvious to new users. So
I'd kind of like to see that moved over to a card style as opposed to a table. I think if you had a card style for each group, and then within the group was kind of a table style, I think creating a little bit of separation between each group, but then also having a separation between your single URL versus your dynamic URL, it would create even more distinction between, you know, your about page, your home page, your contact page, versus, hey, this is a services layout that is going to handle the manipulation or the output of multiple service pages. I just coming in and kind of looking at it, I feel like everything is jumbled together. I don't know what I'm looking at. Nothing is organized, and that was kind of my big beef with it. So
Yeah, I mean, everything is organized, but it's not clear to anyone looking at the page that it is.
right.
Like all the paths that are the same are grouped together, but it's exactly the same heading as like the default heading, right? So yeah, it's confusing.
well, I
And
have
that could-
a question
ahead.
about the organization, Jen. I've always understood that the higher up a layout is on the list, the more priority it has. So
within a group.
within a
true.
group.
So if you have like 4 node templates, the nodes go if else, if else, if else. But the way this whole page works is that it's only going to match one group.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
doesn't matter what order it's in.
So in response to Phil's concern, I created a specific node /3 layout. And that is listed after the node /% layouts, but it takes precedence over them. And that surprised me. I thought that if it took precedence over the main node layout, it would appear before them in the list. And I don't know if that's a bug or if I misunderstood that.
So I learned 30 seconds ago that the order they're in on a page matters. I had no idea.
Well, it doesn't say that anywhere. The only reason I think I know that is I think I've heard Jen say it, but I might have misunderstood.
Yeah, and if you have 2 things that can be ordered, a button shows up that says reorder. But if you don't ever have them, you would never know that.
Yeah.
You know, if you never create anything that needs an order, you'll never even know that there are things that can have an order. So it's one of those chicken and egg things where you're like, I wish there, but it's there. You just can't see it. Yeah, there's a lot of like hidden gems like that.
Right.
I actually want to throw into this because this actually feeds into a problem we've inherited from Drupal, and that we can't solve until we I think address the bigger UI issues I was talking about changes from Drupal. Because I think one of the things that problems that Drupal had that we inherited is the interface out of the box. The day one you turn it on is pretty complicated. There's like a million different things. And that's confusing on day one. But if you inherit a site that somebody else has built, like a fully built out site, you take that complicated interface and you add like 50% more arbitrarily named things. And then someone who doesn't know like for sure the things that came with the system has no idea what's the new stuff and what was added specific to the site. And I feel like that's super important, that at some point we really have to notate like, okay, your site is different from the installed thing by this stuff. I think
you opened an issue on this, didn't you, Luke? Or it seems to me we opened an issue after you brought this up before.
I might have. I've been bothered by it for a decade, so I might have mentioned it before.
It's possible now, or maybe it was never possible before, because we have default configuration for everything, and so you could just do a massive config diff.
Is it default?
Yeah, so like every module has its own default config file with all the default values in it. And so you can say, what is my current site? What's different from the default? And just generate something like that, where we never have been able to do that before. Now, trying to turn that JSON diff into something that's legible to a
It's right,
human
right.
is going to be a nightmare, but we have the ability to know, where I feel like with a Drupal site, just the task of finding out what's different was so unsurmountable that nobody could have even found that an attractive puzzle to solve.
So that smells like a potential initiative.
Yeah, I mean, I think your other initiative is more important.
No, I gotta finish that. I gotta finish it. There's no doubt about that.
I can't say no to it being a potential.
I wasn't saying it was a good one for me to do now.
Can you have another? You had like 3 other initiative ideas. You have all these ideas.
Yes.
I know.
Yeah.
That's the start of my life.
Mama Duel, did you come today with a specific issue or just come to say hi?
Oh, no, for this issue about the home, because I am still looking about this issue layout, and I am also confused about this issue. What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Specifically the homepage layout
Yes.
or what? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I think this idea of layouts that wrap versus layouts that are standalone pages is something that we do not differentiate at all in the UI. And
So I don't know if you saw, Jen, but Phil brought that up. Well, he called it single page and multi-page layouts. And you're talking about the same thing, essentially, aren't you?
yeah, although
Okay.
it's a multi-page layout can affect one page, right? You can have a node template for node 3.
Mhm.
So I don't think that's the right terminology, but yeah,
Sure.
I don't think I'm using the right terminology.
Sure. Well,
should have a whole debate about that.
Phil raised the issue and I just opened a ticket to talk about that. It wasn't clear to me that would be valuable, but the fact that you're also saying that.
Yeah, and I think like the only difference when you're looking at a layout is the main page content block. Like everything else is the same. And it might be good to have some kind of reference on the layout itself that's other than that block. The layout list is a little easier to tell because well, I don't know. I mean, you'd have to know what you're looking at, I suppose. But the single pages have a link to the page, right? And the things that are wrappers have a pattern that they apply to that can't link. So it's just the fact that it's link or not link. It's again, if you know what it is, you can see it. If you don't know what it is, probably just look right over it every day. Don't know that that's a distinction. But yeah.
So you bring up kind of an interesting question for me. Are you saying that a wildcard template, or I'm sorry, a wildcard layout is going to take precedence over a single page layout, or is it the other way around?
I don't know. I have never tried to target the same page in 2 different ways. For me, if I want a standalone page, I make a standalone page. And if I want a node to have a template, then I use a node template. But I've never tried that thing that Tim said, where he tried to overwrite node 3 with a standalone page by putting in that path. And I think that might also be another bug, just like you're allowed to accidentally overwrite the homepage with a node. I don't think you should be allowed to accidentally overwrite a node with a layout, just because it's going to create a bunch of confusion for people. If you're, node 3 disappears, and now you have something else there. In the same way, your homepage might disappear.
It might be worth kind of looking at that from the standpoint of ordering, and set it up to where the default layout, that's your base. That's at the very bottom of the list. The next one up would be your wildcard layouts. Those take precedence. And then if you want to override an individual page, that takes precedence. So basically a hierarchy to where the base layout or the default takes care of everything. But if you want to override a particular content type with a wildcard, that's going to take precedence. And then if you want to override a specific page within that wildcard, then that single page overrides. That's
between those 2 things. That's just whether you add a visibility condition for a content type or a visibility condition for a node ID. Like there's no distinction between those 2. They're both node %. But I think it's supposed to do what you're asking for already. But Tim found this loophole where he was able to overwrite node 3 with a standalone layout, and it showed up below the node % section. And I think that's something that we didn't ever envision happening when this was designed. And so it's probably something that's allowed that isn't intended to be allowed, but works. But like we didn't know if it would work because nobody's ever tested it. So I think we just need a little more examination into that and the thought process that people have that make them create that. And maybe when they try that, we create the thing they're supposed to create instead through the same UI. So like if you put in node 3, it automatically replaces that with node/% and a visibility condition for node 3 so that you don't have to know that that's how you need to do it. And I think that's totally possible.
Okay.
My question is, what's the problem with Drupal 7 solution? Because its node or font is okay now, but why need to go with /home or like that?
Yeah, if you want a Drupal 7 solution, you can do that in Backdrop. You can disable the front page layout and you can go to the setting and type in /node. And that's the same thing you get from Drupal 7. So if you don't want to use a standalone layout for a homepage, you don't have to. It's just the most common use case for a panel in Drupal 7 is the homepage. And so because Backdrop is using panels, it made sense to do the standalone. Most common use case for that layout was the homepage. But it doesn't, there's nothing wrong with doing it Drupal 7 way. If you liked that, you can do that in Backdrop too.
This is kind of a side note. Personally, I'd like to get rid of the block that shows the list of nodes for the homepage and go ahead and replace that with an actual content type. I think most people, they're going to replace that block anyway so that they can put in a content type or a block to add content. And it could be that this is something that if we move forward on some profiles that are more out of the box experience profiles, that, you know, we can handle this within the profile. But I've never been a real big fan of just vomiting a whole bunch of nodes when it's like, no, I'm never going to show all of these nodes. You know, I need content for the homepage.
Yeah,
So just
I think
that's a separate issue. So.
Why
Yes,
we
also I know
right?
about Drupal. Here is possible to note to make a
Backdrop making that a layout means you can remove the block and you can put whatever you want in there. So that was, I think, you know, one of the main reasons to use a layout, but also it gives you the ability to customize like what you want in that river. So like, I agree, the old blog style homepage isn't great, but all those posts are promoted. And so if you wanted to just show like latest news on your homepage, you could do that by like only promoting news items. You might also just make a different view, but it sort of gives you the flexibility to figure out how you want to solve that. If you don't want to touch the layout, you can do it in other ways by curating your content into the, you know, that is only the content that's promoted. So if you don't ever promote any content, there won't be anything there. But yeah, flexibility.
Mamadou, what were you trying to say?
Yes, I'm trying to say because Drupal, everything is node and it's possible to change like create a home page with without page layout to create another page type. Like here is article, basic package or news. So we can do that through our content or node base. So why need to make a panel? I cannot understand that because here is already a solution.
Yep, you can do that.
I think he's asking why, I guess, why the decision for using a layout as basically the home page, as opposed to maybe just promoting, you know, what's that?
Just because it was the most common use case.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's, you know, anything you want, you can choose to do.
I mean, yeah, to me, one of the big advantages of the things I got excited about layouts right away was that I didn't have to, like, I was always jumping through hoops to customize the front page in Drupal. And Backdrop, like, I was excited about the fact that we had this homepage layout. It's like, I can do anything I want with my homepage. I don't need to default to something else. So to me, that was like a big improvement, but I understand not everybody might not see that.
Yeah.
Something else that I think would be a huge benefit to the user experience on this is to go ahead and we have the view and the edit tabs. Also add a layout tab. And at first I thought it was a great idea. And then I realized that you can override the same path with 2 different layouts. That creates problems. But then I came back to full circle and realized if we can just create an anchor to that group, when you click the layout tab, it will scroll you down to that layout group on the layout list page. So we can still have that layout tab. And I think that's kind of a big disconnect, you know, for me coming in here. It's like, okay, well, how do I add content to this homepage? Well, now I have to figure out that I have to go to the layout page, the layout list page, and then edit the layout for that home layout group in order to do what I want to do. If we had the layout tab up there at the top on every page, and it takes you to the layout list, the exact group that you need to manipulate for that path, then obviously for some wildcards, I mean, yeah, now even on wildcards, it would work out too, because you know, if you're on a services page and that's a wildcard for services for that content type, well, it would take you to that group.
In a way that's invisible. If you click the contextual link on any block on any page, it will take you to that layout that's being used to render that page. But again, this is another thing that if you know it's there, you use it all the time because it's really helpful. And if you don't know it's there, you'll never discover it because it's invisible. But yeah, in that issue you mentioned about having one page that can be managed by 2 layouts is not supposed to be possible. That's the bug that we need to fix. That's the thing.
No, I think that's I don't think that is a bug. So for example, a homepage, you can set a contextual filter so that if it's an anonymous, they get one display of the homepage. If it is a logged in user, they get a different display of the homepage. So
that's still one layout with different
well, you can have multiple layouts within the same group.
No, it's
Right,
one.
that's
It's just one layout with different set of blocks. I
Right.
mean, it's the same set of blocks, different visibility conditions, right? So
Yeah.
the way I handle that, if I want a user, an authenticated and unauthenticated user, to see different things on the home page, I just create 2 blocks on the same layout, one for authenticated and one for unauthenticated.
And
Yeah,
you
see,
still
I would
use standalone pages like /home/auth and /home/anon, but that's still 2 distinct layouts. It's never going to be one layout governing 2 paths. It's just not, it doesn't work that way. And the fact that there are a couple of interfaces that allow you to set that up is a bug. So there are lots of different ways you can set up the scenario you're describing, but none of them would have one URL that 2 layouts can affect. The layout manager will only ever select one and render it through one. There's just some tricks there as to how it chooses that one that maybe aren't working as expected.
So we've run over time. Should we wrap it
Yeah.
up? And
Yeah, I do think that this layout UI though needs more discussion. So maybe, I mean, I don't know if we have a meta for it already, but it might be the kind of thing where we take the discussion online and brainstorm ideas. Like Phil, if you could write down your ideas about cards for that layout or how you think that organizing that layout list might be better. I think that would be really useful.
Okay.
So, but yeah, it is layouts. It's again, it's, you know, the API is the same as panels, but the UI is entirely new. And so definitely room for improvement everywhere. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Does anyone have anything they want to add before I do? Okay, we don't go anywhere. I'm just going to stop the recording and we'll come back.